Well, hello, With Gratitude Matt listeners. My name is Matt Moran. I'm the host for the With Gratitude Matt Show. Our goal with the With Gratitude Matt Show is to inspire our listening audience to practice gratitude regardless of how powerful their storm is. We've learned that the practice of gratitude works much like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. I'm so delighted to have today's guest on the show. Today's guest is Jon Dannemiller, a high school classmate of mine. When we were juniors in high school, I did not realize that Jon was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. He brought that to my attention recently when we reconnected. Jon has three beautiful children, and he is planning his wedding to Lisa within the next year. Jon is a graduate of Notre Dame University in South Bend, Indiana, and I'm so delighted to welcome Jon to the show. Jon, welcome to today's show.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to be here.
Jon, I mentioned what transpired in our junior year of high school, but I think it's important to maybe go back to what happened, what your life was like pre-diagnosis and what your family experience looked like leading up to this.
Sure. So, prior to getting sick, I would just consider myself to have been a pretty normal kid. I was the oldest of five, the first one to go to St. X. Was healthy, and I hardly ever got sick. And in that, and I was not to say I was that great of an athlete, because if you've seen me, I'm not that big of a guy. But I did wrestle at St. X and did pretty well my sophomore year, and I just started as a freshman. So from an overall health standpoint, I think I was pretty good. But the summer of my, after sophomore year, I started going to the bathroom more frequently, and then having some blood, and at the point when school started, and I was so excited too. That's like a pretty cool time. You're driving, you're going out with girls, you're going to parties, and so I was pretty excited. And I can't remember how long I lasted, maybe a week, and I just couldn't go to school. I'm going to be a little bit, if it's okay, be a little bit off color here, in that I was shitting my pants, and I couldn't keep it from happening. So that gives you a little bit of background as to what it was like before. So it took a little bit of time to get diagnosed, because back then you didn't necessarily go to a specialist right away, and so we're going to the family doctor and the GP, and I still kind of remember this. He did a colonoscopy, and the doctor was colorblind, and he's like holding the scope up for my dad to look at, and he's like, "Can you tell me what this looks like? Because I'm colorblind."
Oh boy.
So and I won't go into the gory details of what that was like, but that was the start of from a diagnosis standpoint. And so once they figured out that it was in all likelihood ulcerative colitis, because there's some other gastrointestinal diseases, Crohn's disease, just irritable bowel syndrome. There's some upper GI things that you can have going on. But once they were able to kind of figure that out, I started going on to medication, and the only medication that really worked, and things are a lot different today. If this had happened today, it'd be a whole different story. But the only medication that worked was steroids. So, and not the kind of steroids that beef you up like the weightlifters do, but these are not anabolic, but catabolic steroids, where they would actually could potentially have the ability to break down muscle tissue. So the other problem that you have with it, and if anyone's been on it before, you tend to balloon up. So I went from being pretty emaciated, thin, thin in the face, to getting a moon face, and having, it's funny, it's every once in a while, Lisa will be like, "What's that?" I'm like, "Those are stretch marks," because I just put on weight so fast. Um, and with being on steroids, your body just doesn't heal like it would otherwise. So I've got permanent reminders.
Jen, question along this. I remember when you first brought this to my attention, we were just talking about how things happen chronologically. But if I remember correctly, you're talking about putting on quite a bit of weight because of the steroids. But am I right in that at some point you lost a bunch of weight?
Oh yeah.
Because you weren't able to keep things down, and
Yep.
Did this happen? Was that prior to the steroids that you went on to?
Yeah. So think of it as the summer when I started to get sick. I lost weight, which was interesting because when I wrestled my sophomore year, I wrestled at 108, I guess 105, 108, and
Was that dry or wet?
that was after sweating out a lot. But I remember Dick Murphy, the wrestling coach, came up to me and asked me if I could drop weight the following year and wrestle at 98 or 103. And
Oh boy.
and so through that summer, I'm like, oh, this would be no problem. I'm losing all this weight. But then, I probably went from 100 pounds to 140 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
And I have to imagine, I mentioned we met in high school. I don't recall this at all, and I was so grateful that you brought it to my attention, because I think one of the things that I talk about all the time is just being present to those you're with, and I feel awfully bad that I was just not aware of the pain that you were going through as a sophomore. And I guess question I have for you, when you talk about putting on that weight and ballooning up, because I've seen and witnessed what steroids can do to people. I would have to believe that brought probably a little anxiety towards yourself with respect to showing up to school, and many people like looking like you totally transformed your body for some reason or another, and probably not understanding what really happened. Was that a difficult
I
for
think
you to show up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't recall being scarred by things people would have said at school, and honestly, I think I'm not saying the situation would have been different at a different school, but as you know, Matt, the culture at St. X is pretty cool, and the guys there tend to have each other's backs, but I think more socially, I mean, I remember being super awkward with girls, trying to date girls, and because it wasn't like I gained the 40 pounds and then it didn't change. I mean, because the way the treatment would work is they would put you on steroids until you would go into what they thought was remission, and then they would wean you off the steroids, in which case, when that happens, you're losing weight again, and then I would have a flare up and then back on steroids and balloon back up again, and that went on for, I don't know, six years. Not just high school either. So, and I honestly it wasn't like I was telling everybody. I mean, there may have been a handful of people that knew at school what was going on. I mean, the administration did, but wasn't like, hey, everybody, here's why I've been out.
Yeah.
So, and I think it just takes time to be able to, and just maturity to be able to know that at the end of the day, you're not the only person that stuff like this happens to, and that there's a grace in a way of being able to tell your story to other people. I look at it that way. So
That's beautiful. I think I mentioned to you when we connected on this, I have a friend of mine up here in Buffalo, Brian, who was diagnosed with same sickness in 2011. And I was recently talking to him, knowing that that we were going to connect. And I know that you're grateful for a lot of the advancements that have transpired as it relates to this to today, and some of it, even standard protocol, probably different today than they were back in '85. But he was on a drug called Intevo. Does that name ring a bell to you by chance?
It doesn't, but you know what? If you listen to any of the newscasts, there's all kinds of drugs out there today. I remember even when, just to kind of go through the story a little bit more, I struggled back and forth with things for many years, and when I got out of school, I was having issues with being able to work, and at that point, my gastroenterologist in Cincinnati told me that I needed to have my colon removed, and sent me up to the Cleveland Clinic and had my entire large intestine removed. And at that time, there wasn't any other options. But shortly thereafter, we have a family cousin who was also a gastroenterologist, and we were at a family reunion, and I was telling him what was going on. And literally the drugs, there's a drug, Remicade, that came out maybe a year later.
Wow.
That, who knows? I don't really look at what happened to me as like a bad thing. I look at it as, I don't know. I just look at it as, okay, yeah, that happened, but I've moved on, and I've had a very normal life. I've been able to do a lot of cool stuff, and I just wouldn't trade any of it for. You can't. It's not like you can just take parts of your life and say, let's trade these in.
That's beautiful that you look at it that way, and I think it's remarkable. Brian did say, when I connected with him, he mentioned that he was on this Intevo, but he said the greatest medication was prayer. And I know that you've leaned into that quite a bit. How did prayer help you through your most difficult times?
Well, I think that when, especially at that age, it's probably logical for people to have the feeling of, why me? Why? This sucks. I don't get to do the stuff that I wanted to be able to do. And I think you have to, you really just have to take a step back and say, okay, maybe, God has a plan for all of us. And you really do need to have faith in that, that it's, it's going to work out based upon how he wants it to work out. And if you have that faith that that's what's going to happen, I think, at the end of the day, that's what it happens. So
that all sounds, it's not surprising for me to hear that, but if you back up to when you're, 19, 20 years old, 21 years old, and you're in the thick of this right now, and you're going through that, I have to believe that your family, your parents, instilled in you the importance of prayer, because that doesn't just happen, without good foundation prior to that.
Oh, for sure. And this is, you said at the beginning of the show that gratitude is kind of like a muscle, and it absolutely is. And if you, I've since found, and I think it's just a combination of all the things that happen to you, that when you're in a situation where you think things just aren't going your way, if you start to think about all of the things that you should be grateful for or thankful for, it puts it all in the perspective it should be in that whatever it is you're dealing with right now isn't that big of a deal. You've got a lot of stuff going on in your life that's really, really great, and you focus on that, and it allows you to get through those tough times too. But for my parents, though, they were, especially my mom, incredibly prayerful. I mean, I don't remember ever having dinner where we didn't say grace. And it wasn't just grace, like lesser these, I guess, man. It was afterwards we would be talking about things that we're thankful for and what we want to pray for, things going on in our lives. And then that generated family discussion too, which is, I don't know, probably doesn't happen as often now as it used to. But no, they were extremely faithful people. They got me involved in a lot of stuff through the parish that we were in at the time. I got involved in the Archdiocesan Youth Commission through high school, and then in college was involved in stuff there too. And it's continued. I mean, every parish that I've been a member of, I just feel like you've got to give back in order for the whole thing to work.
That's awesome to hear the background and the foundation that your parents built for you with respect to faith. And that is one of the things that I'm most grateful for with respect to my parents as well. And I want to move because, this all popped up when you were a junior in high school, as we talked about. Then you had the good fortune of going to Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. Your sickness, didn't end in Cincinnati. It continued while you were at Notre Dame as well. And maybe speak to or share with the group what happened when you were a freshman in college there.
Yeah. So this is kind of a part of my background that a lot of people would just call being stupid, but I got connected to a gastroenterologist in South Bend, and that I was monitoring my health, etc. And I had a colonoscopy, so I would have regular colonoscopy. So I still had my colon at this point. I would have regular colonoscopies, so they would just check things, make sure everything's okay. And went out to a party the night before this scheduled colonoscopy, and I, sometimes drink at parties in college, and so I had a few to drink, and I was actually extremely hungover the next morning going to this colonoscopy, and I mean, honestly, I could have died because the doctor's thinking that I'm green from the fact that I'm going to go under because they put you under anesthesia. So he's thinking I'm green from that, not knowing that I'm hungover, and then puts the anesthesia in me. Luckily, I was able to get up, wake up later. But yes, things like that. There was another time where I went to a dance. So they've got these crazy screw your roommate dances at Notre Dame, and went to a dance and was having this great time. And I'm literally walking the girl back to where her dorm or whatever, and I'm getting ready to kiss her, or maybe I started to kiss her, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh crap. And I was like, cut it off mid kiss and said, gotta go.
That must have been just very nerve-wracking.
Oh, it definitely was. But the ironic thing, or not irony, the funnier part now anyway, but looking back at the time, it wasn't funny. Every single time that girl looked at me later, she was like, what is wrong with you?
No, I appreciate you sharing that with us. When we connected, one of the things I loved about just reconnecting with you, Jon, was you shared with me I would say a unique way of praying, and you learned this from a priest friend of yours, and I think it emphasizes starting prayer with gratitude, praising God for all of the awesome things that He's put into your life, and just be so appreciative. Also at the same time, exemplifying forgiveness for the faults that you might have done or been part of, and then talk about, the things that you want or need God's help in. And maybe if you could speak to, how you first became aware of that unique way, that order of praying, and then two, what it's done for you.
I think and again, those forms of prayer are not, and they're not earth shattering. I mean, people do it all the time, maybe not necessarily together or all in an order, but, I was involved in, the RCIA program, up at Holy Cross Immaculata in Mount Adams. And I think if I recall, the reason how this came up was somebody that was going through, RCIA, which is the Rite of Christian Initiation for adults, where someone is studying to come into the Catholic faith. They asked, it was Father Stan Nyheisel, who was the pastor there at the time. They said, how should I pray? And he talked about those four things. And the thing that I always think is interesting is that I usually don't get past the gratitude part. That's the first thing I do, thankful for, all the people in my life, for the things that I've been able to do. I mean, mainly just the people and the relationships that I have. And a lot of times I don't get any further than that, especially if I'm praying before I go to bed, I just fall asleep. But it is, if you think about it, God gives us some pretty cool stuff. I mean, people in our lives, and those relationships are really the foundation upon, who we are as people, how we act, how we interact. But, going on from there, praising God for, if without him, nothing here would be possible. And I think, you need to be sorry for things that you do wrong. So you need to be able to do that with God. But then finally, the last thing that I get to is, what I want. And that's usually where people start prayer is, think about the things you want God to help you with. But I think the perspective of doing that last allows you to realize that sometimes those things that you're asking for maybe really aren't that, needy. You don't really need them.
Well, what's interesting to me as I think about just my prayer life, and you get to that last point, the most difficult part of this is really deciphering the difference between God's will and your will. And what I've learned over time is I feel like the most beautiful things that happen to me in my life are, generally speaking, not things that I dreamt up in my own head. It's just stuff that kind of organically just happened. And that's really because it's happening in God's will. And but it is difficult when you find yourself ill or sick, not well, to not pray for specific things that you want. But it's really just ultimately we're asking for God's will to be, clearly, visible to us. But it's very difficult, very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. And it's definitely easier as you get older to be able to have a different way to look at it or perspective. But that point is one that God's will. I mean, I remember being sick and thinking, man, I just want to get better. But also thinking, maybe there's a reason for this. Maybe there's, some other good that's going to come about. I don't think I mentioned this to you before, and it doesn't happen as often now as it did shortly after my surgery, but my physician here in Cincinnati, he would ask me to talk to people that he had recommended to have surgery or that were having difficulties with whether it was Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, and it's, I don't know their total frame of mind, but I would have to think that some of those folks were pretty down. And, being able to communicate, my story, and that you've got this isn't a death sentence. You can definitely get better from this. And then them also hearing things like, I got married, had kids, I have normal jobs. Nobody, unless they hear my story, they would never know that that I went through what I went through, that I don't have a colon. So I think that if you look at it from that perspective, if I was able to help, just one other person, let alone several.
Well, I know you're going to, and that's why I was so excited to have you on today's show. Let's move to kind of now, like today. And, your surgery, was that mid-90s? Is that right, originally?
Yeah, it was 1993. So
93, okay.
Yeah, so I was 23 years old at the time. So I've lived the majority of my life now without my colon and with it. So it's, I don't know. I think if people out there have even just like an irritable bowel syndrome on occasion, they know that certain foods might trigger it. Sometimes stress for me will make it worse than better. Some foods make it worse than better. So you just learn to kind of deal with it. If you're going to have something spicy, which I like spicy foods, you just have to know you're going to deal with it later.
That's something for me personally, I used to like spicy foods today too, but my wife, I can't do spicy anymore. It's just too risky. It's too risky. Not willing to take that risk today. So I mentioned you're planning a wedding coming up. You've got your beautiful children. Is there any activity that you cannot do today that
No.
you would like? Yeah, that's awesome. That's what I was thinking.
No. I through my 20s, I played with the Notre Dame club. I played flag football. I coached I've coached lots of teams. Both of my boys have played competitive baseball, and my youngest is a senior in high school. I bowed out of coaching a few years ago, not because I couldn't, but I just wasn't that good. At that age, I wasn't good enough of a coach. Coached their basketball teams, coached football before. I've coached soccer. I don't know. There really isn't anything I can't do. It does kind of stink sometimes where I have to make sure, and if I'm going to be in somewhere for a long period of time, I might want to make sure there's a bathroom there. But other than that, it never comes into play. It's amazing as to number one, just my overall health. It's good. I don't take any medications. I've got some hypertension and cholesterol, but all of us guys in our 50s have that probably. But I don't take any medications. None of them. No medications impact my life. I'm able to work out. I've ran the marathon in 2000. I've run a bunch of 10Ks. My knees are shot now, but so there really isn't anything I can't do.
What marathon did you do in 2000?
The Peg in Cincinnati.
Okay. I did Chicago right around the same time. I think I did Chicago in 99. Might have been 2000. I have somewhere in here. Did one, and I said I'll never do another one in my life.
That's exactly what I said. It was killer on my knees, and which has nothing to do with any of my health problems. So,
Do you still run today?
I don't run. I will do other cardio just because my knees will just, you know, I'd prefer to keep my existing knees as long as I can. So,
Yep. Yep. Jon, I just want to, well, first off, I really appreciate you sharing your story. And I think what I've learned just through all the guests that I've had on, literally everyone in the world deals with some sort of hurdle that they're going through, and many are going through it right now. And I think the more we are open to sharing how one might get through that hurdle, it can only help others that are dealing with it. It could be anything. It could be addiction in the family. It could be depression, cancer, whatever. And I know that your story will resonate with classmates. I share with you, I got a call from a classmate of ours just last week, Jeff Rissover, and he, we talked, and I think he'd be open for me sharing this with the community, particularly the St. Xavier community. But he was recently diagnosed with kidney cancer, and I was honored that he reached out to me, and I was just I that alone gave me evidence that what I'm doing here with this show is helping others. And Jeff and I had a wonderful conversation, and I'm very confident that he's going to do very well because they've just made radical advancements in that disease as well as ulcerative colitis as well. And so I just thought I'd bring that up just because he's a classmate of ours.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to, if you get to this point, if you get to the point of a mindset of that your life can be a benefit to not just the very small group of people around you. I mean, not just your immediate family, kids and stuff like that, but if you can realize that your life can impact other people, oftentimes people you don't ever meet, it gives you, I don't know, for me, it gives even more of a credence and a hope and it solidifies my faith that, God put us here for a reason, and we need to fulfill that reason.
Yeah. So what you just said reminds me of the motto that we heard every single day while at St. Xavier High School. And it's really the Jesuit motto, being a man and or woman for others. What impact do you think that had on you thinking the way you think today with respect to health, doing things to benefit others, not necessarily yourself?
Well, again, I had this happen to me when I was at St. X. So it's hard to imagine how things might have turned out if I wasn't there. But it's not that I've been that involved with the school. My oldest graduated from X. My other son went there for 2 years. So I saw a lot of the impact it has, not just being a student, but seeing it from the eyes of a parent. And it's an unbelievable motto if you really think of it, because if every single one of us devoted ourselves to others, we would all get taken care of and what we need in the world. We would actually experience the kingdom here.
So true. So true. Jon, as we kind of wrap up, this is just a really remarkable story that I think a lot of people are going to find valuable as they think about their hurdles. But and I close really each one of my shows very similar, but I'm going to ask your question in a little bit different mindset. So you dealt with this hurdle of yours, call it, early on, mid high school, and then beyond into college, and and still deal with some of the side effects of that today. I'm so grateful that you are healthy and doing well. But as you look back on what you experienced as it relates to your sickness, is there any part of it that you can say, you know what, I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to go through that because it allowed me to do X, Y, and Z? And if the answer is yes, I'd love to hear from your perspective what that X, Y, and Z are that perhaps you wouldn't have been able to experience had it not been for this.
Number one, I wouldn't want to change any part of my life that I've had. I've been incredibly blessed on so many different levels. So I don't ever have that discussion. Sometimes I laugh about it and say, man, if I hadn't had this, then, who knows what would have happened. But I don't want my life to have changed. So I wouldn't want that to be the case. But to think about what's transpired, I think I may not be as kind of a person, and I'm not saying that I'm a super kind individual, but I don't know that I would be as kind of a person if I hadn't gone through this, because I can't tell you the number of times where, you see something happening, like we just moved into our house a couple years ago, and I'm going out of the neighborhood one day, and there's a school bus, and it's like taking forever, like the red lights are on, and I'm starting to get upset, and I'm like, you know what? There's probably a reason why this school bus is having issues or whatever. And sure enough, there's a handicapped person that lives there, and the mom has to get on the bus to take the kid off the bus, and I'm like, I'm not getting mad about that at all. And you have to think of it that way as you deal with people. I mean, I don't know. Think about how many people you come across every day. If you were able to have a smile on your face, or if they all had smiles on their faces and, said, hey, how you doing? And just generally kind, the world would be a better place. So I would like to think that as a result of this, maybe others have experienced some of that kindness, and, their lives might be a little bit better.
Now, empathy and just awareness of other people's struggles, I think I too have found that I think I have a little bit more empathy as it relates to what I've had to go through, and the world would it would be such a beautiful place if everybody thought beyond just themselves. And
well, scientifically, I've actually tested. I mean, just because of sales programs and stuff, and I have a really, really high level of empathy from a testing standpoint, and there's just no way I would have that high level if I hadn't gone through what I went through.
Right. No, that's awesome. Well, listen, John, I know that your story is going to resonate with so many, and so grateful that you were able to share your story with us today. The one thing that I've also learned through this, because there was questions early on for myself as to how public should I be with respect to that. But what I found is, because I have been pretty public with respect to the kidney cancer that I've been successfully managing, there's so much more love and support out there. But if you're to yourself and you don't share it, you may not get the love and support from others that you might get had it just been open to sharing. And I know it's difficult to sometimes kind of relive that pain, but that pain that you lived, John in particular right here, others can certainly learn for it and grow from it, find the courage to be grateful, like when they're right in their valley. It kind of goes hand in hand. What I talk about when I close each one of my shows, it's find the courage to be grateful, regardless of how powerful your storm is. We talk about truly being present. If you're really present to those you're with, you'd be amazed at the love and support that's right in front of you right at the time that you may need it. So just be present to the love and support that's around you. And lastly, it's pay attention to how you're feeding your mind, your body, and your soul. Today's guest was my high school classmate, Jon Dannemiller. Jon, such an honor to have you on today's show. If today's show inspired you in some way, shape, or form, please subscribe to the show, comment on it, and share it with others. With gratitude, Matt listeners, until next time, find the courage to be grateful. Godspeed, my friends.